Dona Nobis Pacem, Pacem. Dona Nobis Pacem. Dona Nobis Pacem, Pacem. Dona Nobis Pacem. Dona Nobis Pacem. Dona Nobis Pacem.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to today's the LaRouche Organization show, a Manhattan Town meeting. And we're going to be discussing today a theme, which you've just heard, Dona Nobis Pacem. It's part of an initiative that we're taking as a whole to try to give people a way of stepping away from the realm of geopolitics into the realm of statecraft. This is something that is called upon citizens to do because most of the leadership, particularly of the transatlantic sector, seems to have lacked the moral fitness to survive, or at least is hiding its morality under a rock at the moment. Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder of the Schiller Institute, about 2 weeks ago, roughly, began to devise and then proposed on November 22nd at a conference 10 principles for the organization of a new strategic architecture. And we'll be getting to those 10 principles, which you'll hear from her in a moment. But prior to doing that, we want to just let you know about something that just happened, which is an appearance that she made on Chinese national television. Helga, it should be noted, had been one of the key dialogue participants with the nation of China from the early 1990s on the question of what people today refer to as the Belt and Road Initiative, something that was then referred to as the New Silk Road. And back at that time, in 1996, actually, we produced this report, the Eurasian Land Bridge, the New Silk Road, locomotive for worldwide economic development. That was 1997. And then in 2014, the New Silk Road becomes the World Land Bridge. That is to say that there's been an unbroken effort by this organization on this matter for over a period of 25 years with which she has been particularly identified. What we're going to play you first is just a clip from their coverage of her discussion about the idea of this Belt and Road Initiative and what it means to the world as a whole. And from there, we'll then begin to discuss her concept of these 10 principles of a new security and development architecture.
In all of these cases, and one should add the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or projects in Africa, these transport projects provided often for the first time the beginning of the construction of modern infrastructure in countries of the developing sector. They always bring an improvement in the speed and access for the movement of goods and people, save an enormous amount of time, always create a framework for investments in industry and agriculture, sometimes are enlarged with investments in energy production and distribution and communication, and often are the beginning of entire development corridors opening up landlocked areas for development, as one could see with the joy and pride of President Widodo announcing the opening of the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed railway at the occasion of this G20 summit in Bali. These projects contain within them the hope for a better future of the respective country. The tragic earthquake occurring within days after the G20 summit in Indonesia on the island of Java just underlines the need to finally install a global earthquake early warning system, which Chinese and Russian scientists are working on, since the effect of such natural disasters can only be minimized through better infrastructure systems. If one looks in the history of the development of the so-called advanced countries, let it be the United States, Germany, Japan, the building of a grid of national infrastructure was always the beginning of industrialization. The criticism by the West of the BRI that it would be an effort by China to take over the world, create debt traps, create dependencies, etc., are thinly veiled cover stories. The former colonial powers had a long time to build railways, roads, and industrial parks in their former colonies, but obviously they didn't. So the BRI has spread so quickly by finding the cooperation with 140 countries because these nations often see the participation in the BRI as the first real chance to overcome poverty and underdevelopment and create a hopeful future for their citizens. It is the natural course of the advancement of mankind that eventually all nations will enjoy the infrastructural, industrial, and agricultural conditions for a decent living standard of their populations. In the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, which destroyed approximately 500 million jobs, and the ongoing threat of a world famine, the world needs the creation of around 1.5 billion new productive jobs. Many of these can be facilitated by developing continentally integrated grids of railways, highways, waterways in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, as well as creating the energy requirements for an improved living standard of the people in the global south. The fact that circa 2 billion people don't have access to clean water points to the need to create new fresh water sources through water management, as well as the investments in desalination projects with the help of small nuclear reactors, ionization of the atmosphere, or accessing aquifers. One of the most exciting projects of the BRI is the ongoing engagement of Chinese companies building a massive science city in Iraq under the landmarked Oil for Projects agreement signed with Baghdad in 2019. There are other such science city projects underway with different countries of the global south, which will allow them to educate a great number of students in advanced sciences, and in this way make it possible for the country to leapfrog from underdevelopment to a modern, science-oriented economy. While the world economy overall has been sluggish, investments in infrastructure in Europe and the US are dangerously lagging behind, and geopolitically motivated sanctions are completely backlashing against especially European economies. The Chinese economy and the BRI have been the true motor of the world economy. So the countries of the West will have to make a choice in the coming period. Either they will stick to their ideologically motivated policies and become increasingly marginalized, or they will remind themselves of their better traditions and decide to cooperate with the emerging new economic order.
Now, in today's dying Anglosphere, where mass killing by war is touted as the only efficient way to stop war, it has become incumbent upon the forces associated with the LaRouche Organization, the Schiller Institute, and other organizations that agree, or individuals that agree, to seize this present moment when we are hearing all sorts of rumors and we don't know exactly war and rumors of war, so to speak, with respect to Ukraine. There's a possibility right now, and it seems to be a reality, of something between 300,000 and as many as 600,000 Russian troops amassing. There are, of course, no serious attempts to negotiate whatsoever. There's a constant denial of the way in which the war actually began, or anything about the fact of the illegal, unjustified overthrow of the government in February 2014 in Ukraine by forces associated with NATO, particularly Victoria Nuland and others involving Great Britain. All of this is denied. We're in a situation where it's necessary for the citizens to step up and to take the initiative to reawaken in the transatlantic nations a commitment to what used to be celebrated as a core part of what was called Judeo-Christian civilization. The idea of voluntary redemption of mankind without guilt and without recrimination. It's supposed to be something that was seen as a mission, and I'm not speaking here religiously, I'm talking about the idea that the civilization itself had a commitment to progress and to the creativity of the individual. That has gone by the boards. So what has happened is that Helga Zepp-LaRouche has proposed 10 principles to establish a global security and development architecture. And as she put it, these principles must be discussed, and if agreed upon, be realized. These ideas are meant to be food for thought and a dialogue among all people concerned to find a basis for a world order, guaranteeing the durable existence of the human species. But we're going to let her speak for herself because she went through this at quite a bit of elaboration. So we present that now.
Well, we have been calling for a new international security and development architecture based on the principles of the Peace of Westphalia. The Peace of Westphalia ended 150 years of religious war in Europe, basically because all war parties realized that a continuation of the war would be to absolutely nobody's benefit because everybody would be dead. 1/3 of large parts of Europe at that time were completely destroyed in terms of villages, cattle, people. So that, led to a negotiation where the outcome was that people recognized that any peace treaty has to take into interest the interest of the other, of every party. And if you don't have a consideration of the interest of all war parties, you will not get peace. Now that Peace of Westphalia led to the international law, which really only emerged after the peace treaty of Westphalia, and that went into the UN Charter, and it's still the body of international law up to the present day. The Versailles Treaty, on the other side, which did not take into account the interest of everybody, especially not Germany, was the prelude to the next World War. And if there is any lesson to be learned from these experiences, we need a new international security architecture which is applying for everybody. And especially, in a time where you have nuclear missiles, the internet, pandemics, we are sitting in one boat. It's not possible to find a peace order for Europe and not for the Indo-Pacific or vice versa. You have to have a solution for the whole world. Now, that's why I attempted to, write down some basic principles. Not that I want to claim that that is the final version, but I just wanted to get the discussion going by, concentrating on what should be the ideas which are applicable to the whole world. Now, I can only suggest that people read these proposals because they're, quite dense. But the first question actually is that we have to reinstall the principle of absolute sovereignty, and that there has to be an alliance or a partnership of perfectly sovereign republics or nation states in cohesion with the UN Charter and with the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. And I think that idea, that without the idea of sovereignty, non-interference in the internal affairs of the other, respect for the different social system, I mean, these are the ideas which, really have to be reintroduced. And this whole idea about interventionist right to protect, all these policies which were introduced by Blair, who deliberately wanted to get rid of the principle of the Peace of Westphalia, that has to be stopped. And we have to return to the idea of the interest of the other and sovereignty as an absolute important ingredient if you want to have a peaceful world. Then naturally, the second point I made is to overcome poverty. I think the idea of a joint mission of all countries of poverty alleviation is very crucial. That has to be the principle on which a new credit system has to be based. And it's just not tolerable that right now already 1.7 billion people are threatened with immediate starvation. And that will get worse as the financial crisis of the West, of the liberal system, is getting worse. So the idea of poverty alleviation is an absolute important mission. Then naturally involved with that is the idea of the image of man. If you think that man is a nuisance to nature and each human being is a burden on nature, then naturally you will not arrive at any solution. But if you have the idea that every human being has a unique potential of creative ability of discovering new principles of the physical universe, that it's generally called scientific and technological progress, and that ability differentiates human beings completely from all other living beings. No other species can do that, and it is that ability of discovery which enables you to have a higher living standard, longer longevity, more people living a good life. So this idea of being clear on what is the character of the human being is a very important idea. And then naturally, the idea of a new credit system, a new health system, and various other points. So I think, I want to challenge people to look at these 10 principles and, write something else. If you don't agree with them, let's have a debate. But I think everything is better than to sit there passively and wait until nuclear war has extincted the human species. So let's have a discussion on how can we give ourselves principles to govern ourselves. I mean, this was a big debate in the early phase of the American Revolution in the Federalist Papers, where all kinds of authors were saying, how do we have to give ourselves principles to self-govern? And this time, this task is for sure there for the entire human species and the international community. So I put out a challenge to start such a discussion.
So if you just joined us, we want to welcome you to today's Fireside Chat, Manhattan meeting with the LaRouche Organization. And you've just heard Helga Zepp-LaRouche describing the 10 principles for the construction of a new security and development architecture. However, of course, this is an idea that would not be believed by many to be possible, especially given the fact that the nations of the West have shut down any possibility for effective negotiations with Russia. And NATO has proceeded to maintain not only sanctions, but maintain weapons and the sending of weapons into that conflict. This is, of course, not a conflict really between Ukraine and Russia at all, as has been properly identified. It's a conflict which is a global conflict at the edge of thermonuclear war. And the more sane, including certain persons in the United States, ranging from comedians to a few politicians, have raised the fact that under no circumstances can there be allowed to be a confrontation between the United States and the nation of Russia or China, which leads to that. And anything done on the border of any of those countries, therefore, that would provoke such a condition is clearly madness. But at the same time, the question is, how would we actually change the circumstance, and that's what we want to get into a discussion about. Now, the economist and statesman Lyndon LaRouche is really the sort of the inspiration for everything done by the LaRouche Organization. Some years ago, he talked about this problem, and there's a section of something he wrote, which actually has a very long title, called Heuristic Application of the Theory of Manifolds to the Current Strategic and Subsumed Tactical Situation. And he said, if one proposed to force existing governments to directly implement a certain policy, the task must seem formally an impossibility. Yet, if the possibility for a rapid succession of intermediating developments is clearly understood, no such difficulty as initially appears to prevail stands in our way. Now, surprisingly, the method by which we might do that today, we are arguing, is the method that is embedded in classical composition. Classical musical composition in specific is what we are talking about and using. And at the beginning of today's show, we played a performance, choral performance of Dona Nobis Pacem. And we're going to be discussing just in a moment this with the persons that have initiated a campaign, which has now become an international campaign, to have this sung and acted upon by people all over the world as a way of allowing for people to understand what we even mean by the nature of a principle. Because yes, we need to talk about not points or policies or programs or agendas, but principles of deliberation by means of which we can solve problems that seem to us to be otherwise insoluble. So just in order to refresh the mind of all of the persons that we're about to talk to, and you as well, to get an insight into how Lyndon LaRouche thought about music and its relationship to the human mind, I'm going to play a clip from him. This is from 1995. It's Washington, D.C., and it's a discussion that he has about the St. Thomas Choir of Leipzig, which he had just previously visited with.
One of the things which was most delicious was we stopped in Leipzig, and I had a very unusual experience in the sense of participating for several hours in auditing a rehearsal of the Thomanerchor in Leipzig. And then the next evening, at the evening Vesper service, hearing the performance of the complete repertoire for that week at the service and being able to compare what had been gone through with the rehearsal and what was heard in the evening. Now, let me just qualify for those who may not know it. Some of you here do know this. The Thomas Cathedral Choir is a separate school, has been in existence since the year AD 1212. It has, according to all reputation, an unbroken singing program that it would sing every week on Friday evening at Vesper service. And that's been going on since AD 1212. The nearest thing they had to a break was in the middle of the Black Death in the middle of the 14th century, at which point they were down to 3 boys because the Black Death was killing off the singers, but they still sang. So the word is that they've sung for almost 800 years. Now, the discipline is tremendous. The cantor who was conducting the performance is himself a product of the school, and was a very trained musician, about 40 years of age, but a full bearer of the tradition. Let me just identify the tradition, and then I'll come back to in due course how it bears on here. They, every week, these boys, who range from 7 to about 18, that is, it's a secondary school program, they are chosen for their voice and their musicality. But they're given a full gymnasium education, like a secondary school, from that time until they complete graduation. Their musical work is done as a part of the total program of studies. Each week, from the beginning of the week until Friday, 4 days a week, normally, except this particular week, but they only had 3 days because of a holiday. 4 days or 3 days a week in this case. They start from scratch with a completely new repertoire for that week's Friday evening Vesper service. They learn from scratch. They then perform on Friday, and the following week take up a complete new program. So in about 3 years or so, they've gone through pretty much the entire Bach motet and cantata repertoire. And they won't forget it, I assure you. They never will forget it. I saw the performance. Not only are they well trained, but this particular discipline is very important. I've seen perhaps not as many rehearsals as some of you have seen, but I've seen a number. And I can tell you the density in the rehearsal, the density of direction was about as intense as I've ever seen. But the boys were responsive and trained and able to do it. During the 3-hour rehearsal, there was a break of about 15 minutes in which these very serious, intent young boys and older boys, sitting in their chairs, cross-legged and otherwise, but nonetheless singing and very intent in the most professional manner, suddenly turned into boys, fresh boys. And they raced out of the area into the yard, played soccer, then came back in as fresh as they had left and sat down sedately, or as sedately as boys can do, in their chairs, and they concentrated totally on what they were doing. So it was total concentration and total training and a masterful direction. Now, the particular work, which was the featured work of the Friday program, which they were rehearsing this Thursday morning when we were in there, Thursday noontime, was Jesu meine Freude, which is one of the most difficult motets to perform adequately, not to perform it, but perform it adequately in the motet repertoire. It has challenges in there which are rather astonishing. The boys were learning it. The direction was intense. The management of the direction was intense. Nothing passed. Everything was corrected. Diction, approaches, everything was involved. The following evening, I missed the intervening rehearsal, which was done as the dress rehearsal in the morning on Friday. But we were at the evening rehearsal, and I tell you, it was one of the few times in recent years hearing a musical performance, the tears came spontaneously flowing out of my eyes. Couldn't hold them back. The performance was magnificent. Everything that they had been taught, that they had rehearsed, every correction came through in the performance. And better, of course, much better. The boys came in intent. There are about 80 of them. 2 groups, the young boys who were the pre-voice change and the young men who were the older after voice change. They came in with a canto behind, every one of them fully concentrated as a musical performer, prepared to perform. And that moment of total concentration that's required before you've got the idea of your composition in your head, before you start to perform. They came marching in with that idea in their head, a full program. They performed with precision, with shaping of tone. They sang not on the notes, but they sang between the notes. They knew how to do that. They were trained for that.
So for today's discussion, we want to bring up a panel, and we'll bring them up right now on screen, I hope, and that will be Bill Ferguson from Boston, who is actually the initial presenter of this idea that the Dona Nobis Pacem would be performed. There's John Segerson, conductor of the Schiller Institute chorus and choir for many, many years. Also, we have with us, let's see, Malena Robinson, TLO member, Farida Gillisberg from Denmark, Schiller Institute, Carolina Dominguez from the Schiller Institute in Mexico, and Karen Knopfsinger. I think they may be joining us later. So, Bill, let me get you started, and why don't you let people know why this idea was proposed, or how you thought of it, and how do you see this going forward? And we'll go to John.
Okay. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, great. When Diane Sayer, who is the candidate in New York for Senate, was not allowed to participate in the debates in New York with Schumer and company, one of our members had brought up the idea of a candlelight vigil to protest her exclusion. And when I heard that, it reminded me of several things. First of all, the process of the candlelight vigils in East Germany in 1989 that were a form of nonviolent protest that eventually led to the fall of the Berlin Wall and the reunification of Germany. It also reminded me of some aspects of the organizing that we had done here in Boston. So at that time, we were engaged in a series of interventions where we confronted our congressmen who, by their support for billions of dollars of weapons to Ukraine, were getting us, marching us toward nuclear war. One of the interventions was conducted by a young man up here, Sam, against Senator Markey. And this was at the Kennedy School of Government. So I had the idea to, experimentally do a little bit of a vigil. We had candle lights and signs outside the Kennedy School of Government. And we got into some discussions with passersby and students at the school. Some were very receptive, but I was particularly struck by a discussion that became increasingly hostile, although not violent, that I engaged in with a couple of Eastern European parent students, one of them from Ukraine. We couldn't get past this back and forth about who is right or wrong, Ukraine or Russia. Why should there be a negotiation as opposed to war and continued war? And I was just frustrated by that. And it occurred to me that this was characteristic of a lot of contentious discussions that one gets into, maybe at the Thanksgiving dinner table, when one's out politically organizing, especially in the controlled environment that is being created in social media, where everything is a back and forth contention and with increasing hostility. Anyway, in order to, as I thought about it, I remembered that back in the 2000s, we had established a colony of young organizers here in Boston of the LaRouche youth movement. And it was specifically organized around the choral principle that Mr. LaRouche was talking about, and also specifically around the piece Jesu meine Freude of J.S. Bach. And in 2004, when the Democratic National Convention was held in Boston, we had 100 of these LIM members intervening in the process of the convention. And they were talking and passing out leaflets, getting into discussions. But the main characteristic, which was the unique feature, was their singing of classical music in the environment of the convention, which seemed to have a profound effect on the convention participants who definitely weren't expecting that. And then later after that, we had about 15 to 20 of these young people here for about 10 years, actually a little bit longer than that. And the center, and this was specifically prescribed by LaRouche, the center of all the educational activity, the work in art, music, history, culture, science, and our political organizing. At the base of it was the rigorous work through and deployment of classical music, and in particular, Jesu meine Freude. So thinking about that, it also occurred to me that we could deploy that kind of technology in the current situation to rise above the clashing and contentiousness and the march toward war. So in one of our national discussions with Mrs. LaRouche, I proposed the idea that we begin a campaign to establish the round Dona Nobis Pacem, grant us peace, as an international anthem for a movement to stop the march toward nuclear war. Reflecting on this, as later, this is LaRouche proposed the 10 principles for the new international security and development architecture. It occurs to me that it's essential. When you talk about peace, for example, what does peace mean? In 1967, Pope Paul VI wrote Populorum Progressio, Development of Peoples, on the development of peoples, where he stated that development is the new name for peace. That was the theme of the encyclical. And this idea, in juxtaposed with a few others, made it clear how to think about this, at least for me. I remembered a quote from a passage from Schiller, I believe is On the Sublime, where Schiller says, "Nothing is so beneath the dignity of human beings as to suffer violence, for it destroys the individual's humanity." And I juxtapose that with the idea that Mahatma Gandhi had stated, that poverty is the worst form of violence. And if you think of violence in the general sense of that which is that destroys the humanity of an individual, then you see that there's really no real lasting sense of peace that doesn't include the idea of eliminating poverty, or rather, in the positive sense, development. And as Mrs. LaRouche states in the 10th principle for the new architecture, she says, "The basic assumption for the new paradigm is that man is fundamentally good and capable to infinitely perfect the creativity of his mind and the beauty of his soul, and being the most advanced geological force in the universe, which proves that the lawfulness of the mind and that of the physical universe are in correspondence and cohesion, and that all evil is the result of a lack of development and therefore can be overcome." So if you want to talk peace, rather than just say, well, peace is the opposite of war, you think of peace as that which ensures this possibility of the infinite perfectibility and creativity of the human mind, and that every person of a nation and on the globe would have the opportunity and the right to pursue that. I think that's totally coherent with the idea in the Declaration of Independence, the inalienable right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So I'll just say, and I'm sure this is going to be elaborated further, when LaRouche is insisting on this choral principle and this immersion in the performance of choral classical music, he's addressing directly this question of creativity. And it does, as we've had these further discussions, it's pretty clear that this is a very efficient way to get this idea across to people, to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, in a way that they don't just observe it and agree or disagree, but they directly participate in it. I mean, one of the fastest ways of getting across something that cannot be or is not so efficiently communicated just through words or discussion or just verbal language in and of itself is the demonstration of the principle through competent performance, which conforms to the principles of beauty, or as Keats put it, beauty is truth, truth beauty, That's all ye know on earth and all you need know. So, well, that's my thinking on this process, and it's beginning to catch on. And well, I guess we'll hear more about that as we proceed. So,
Well, thanks a lot, Bill. And we are going to hear a lot more about that as we proceed. And if you just joined us, welcome to today's LaRouche Organization Manhattan Project show. And we are discussing an initiative that is now going to be further discussed by John Segerson. So, John, take it away.
Thanks, Dennis, and thanks, Bill. Can I be heard?
Yes, you're very clear.
Okay, good. We chose the Dona Nobis Pacem. Again, it means give us peace. Dona Nobis Pacem. I think it's it's easy to learn. Some people may say, "Oh, it's in a foreign language." It's not. It's Dona, to give, donate, to grant us peace. Pacem, peace. So I don't think that's all too difficult. We're proposing that that this become a kind of a theme song for hopefully massive demonstrations for peace and for the principle of what peace actually represents, which, as Bill said, it's not the absence of war. What it is the ability for the human being's creativity to flourish, and everything that's involved in making that possible, which includes infrastructure development. It includes a decent financial system. It includes a health system. It's absolutely necessary for that. Dona Nobis Pacem itself is a short little piece. You heard it once, and I think you'll hear it a few more times, done by various other groups. We're holding some candlelight vigils. I think even there's one going on right now. And hopefully they'll be going on all over the world. This piece was sung in East Germany during the time just before the Berlin Wall came down by the East Germans as a way, and it probably did. The singing of this probably did help bring down the wall, among other things. I wouldn't call it a great piece. That is one of the greatest pieces of art. But what has struck me, and I have had many years of experience both working with LaRouche. I also conducted the Jesumeine Freude and rehearsed that group of young people that Bill was talking about. That this little piece, which is easily learnable by almost anybody, and singable by 3 people or 2 people, it's best 3 at least, in canonical form or in a round form, that this makes accessible some of the deepest and most profound principles of what music is all about and what art is all about. I'm going to quote you 2 little passages from a paper that I just dug up. It's actually a speech that Lyndon LaRouche wrote out in 1987 for a presentation that he did in Augsburg, Germany. I don't think it's ever been published. I don't know. But I want to point out a couple of passages which gets at what I'm talking about. He says that art is not enhanced by making it seem more mysterious in some irrationalist way. It is enhanced by a more rigorous sense of the formal aspects of beauty. And let me say, the word formal there, don't think of formal, right? That's not what formal means. In this case, it has to do with the question of the Platonic forms. The idea that the form of something is actually a higher order of what the thing is. So that's when you're talking about the formal aspects of beauty. And so let me repeat that. It is enhanced by a more rigorous sense of the formal aspects of beauty and by an increased power of comprehension to isolate and recognize the creative element which makes a truly great work of art what it is. And I think that gets it at what we're talking here, because keep in mind that music, and when you're singing something, especially something like this, and as Lyndon also said, we talked about between the notes. Everything about music is not the notes themselves. I mean, a lot of people think of music, they think of sound. It's a lot of sound. But in classical music, the sound is not primary. It's what between the sounds. It's when you move from one interval to the next, one note to the next. What's the interval between that you move? And there's a lawfulness to that. And indeed, the lawfulness of moving within those intervals is something that is not just a principle of music, but it's also a principle of universal lawfulness. This was investigated by Johannes Kepler, in specific, who discovered the principle of universal gravitation, without actually being able to see gravitation, because as with all principles, they can't be seen and they can't be touched. But indeed, they govern everything that can be seen and can be touched. That's the nature of a principle. And that's exactly the way you have to, when you're reading through, as Helga asked you, and you should do it, the 10 principles that she went through, think about that too. That everything, every idea, every principle that you have is something that you can describe it, you can see its effect. And as a matter of fact, it's very important to see its effect. But you can't actually touch the principle itself. It's not even, and it cannot be simply demonstrated by one little phenomenon. It has to be grasped overall with your creative insight, something which only human beings can do. Actually, let me just read this little paragraph here, just about this question of principles. I think this is useful. This is from a little piece this is actually from a speech that LaRouche gave in 2008 in Italy, a speech to an academy there. And he says, "There is no instrument which is so fine which could ever see directly and isolate the phenomenon of gravitation." This is, I was talking about Kepler. And the problem is not fineness. The problem is bigness. When you observe something which is never changing, how do you sense it? You may sense the effect, but you don't sense the cause of the effect. When Einstein is insisting upon, what Einstein is insisting upon, which is not original to him, but it's an original insistence by him, is that universal physical principles cannot be sense experienced in the sense of being isolated to particular phenomena. You can only demonstrate them by the same kind of methods that were used by Kepler to define gravitation. You could define the effect. The effect is demonstrated by the orbit itself, the orbit of the planets, which are ordered according to a very specific harmonic ordering, which reflects a very underlying lawful principles of the universe, at least our part of the universe that we understand. Which means that you're seeing the universe, which is bounded by a principle, which is reflected as the phenomenon of gravitation as an orbital gravitation relationship. So the universe, in a sense, is finite because there's nothing outside universal principles in it. And for various reasons of argument, there's nothing outside of it. Or I would actually say the best way to say that is there's no such thing as outside. So you're talking about a universe which is self-bounded in terms of things which we can demonstrate to be universal physical principles. Now that's a lot to think about. But now let's get back to Dona Nobis Pacem and think about that. This little piece starts with 3 notes. Dona. Okay, dum, 1, 2, 3. Okay, there are three notes. The first note, right, dum, and the dum is with an interval. That interval is called a fourth. Da, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? And then the second interval, right, is what's called a sixth. Right? I'll say a do, na, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so we have a fourth and a sixth, both of those intervals. What struck me about this when Dennis brought it up and Bill started talking about this was how if you think about, I thought about some of my absolutely favorite classical pieces, some of which I've performed myself, or I've sung, or I've heard, and it was really remarkable how many of some of the greatest pieces and the greatest works of art are based on those intervals, just those intervals, the fourth and the sixth. Not all, but let me just give you an example of one thing. One of my, and a lot of them are associated, by the way, with the idea of sacred love. The Greek term is agape, and specifically one of them that strikes at me immediately is Beethoven's little song that he wrote when he was somewhat younger, Ich liebe dich, I love you, and which is about married love, not romantic love, married love. And it starts out with the Ich liebe dich, and same thing on there. Another one, one of his greatest string quartets that Beethoven wrote towards the end of his life, is the Opus 132 string quartet, which has a movement which is called Heiliger Dankgesang, which means a holy song of thanks to the Creator. And that one starts out, instead of having a fourth and a sixth, it has a sixth and a fourth. Da, dee, da, dee. Right? Up a sixth. It goes down a step, and then up a fourth. Also, you can listen to these things, and these are some of the most moving pieces that you can possibly experience. Another one, though, that in the LaRouche movement we have looked at a lot is one where it inverts the intervals. That is, instead of up, they go down. Instead of down, they go up. So instead of going a fourth down and a sixth up, what about going a fourth up and a sixth down? Well, how about this? Da-dee-dum. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right? Da-dee-dum. Well, guess what? There's one of the most well-known little motets that was written by Wolfgang Mozart. Actually, only 5 months before he died. Is called Ave Verum Corpus. Right? The Hail Holy Body. It's about the contemplation of the body of the crucified Christ. And it starts with those intervals. Ave. And then it continues, though, and it brings in something which is very revolutionary, which Mr. LaRouche has written a lot about, and we've looked at a lot. Ave, where it brings in what's called a Lydian interval, which is it's called the augmented fourth or the diminished fifth, but it's an interval whose inversion is itself. So it's a very special interval, and it plays a very special role in the composition of the universe. And as a matter of fact, you can associate that directly with for instance, the area of maximum stress in the solar system, which is the asteroid belt, where there's a destroyed planet, a shattered planet. There's no actual planet. And that's actually associated with that interval. And then this was an interval that was investigated a lot by Mozart all the way through also with Bach, this particular da-dee-dum, because it goes da-dee, that's the interval, or da-dee-dum. So, one other great work that he talks, that it reflects this, and it's one of the seminal pieces for all music, is a fantasy, which is Mozart's K475 fantasy in C minor. And I'll just sing that just so you have the idea of it very quickly. So that's da. It sounds like a minor tri da 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 dum, but he throws that in da 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 dee da dum. This and what struck me also is that in the middle of that fantasy, he throws in another little theme, which I've never really been able to understand until I thought about the Dona Nobis Pacem, because the next part of the Dona Nobis Pacem is Dona Nobis Pacem, dee da dee dum. It's a falling fourth, but also it implies the higher dee da dee da dee da dum. If you add that da 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 dum dee dum, there you get your so-called Lydian interval. But in the middle of the Mozart fantasy, he has this little piece. All of a sudden, he stops everything and he starts going dee da da dum, dee da da dum, dee da dum bum. You can listen to it yourself, but dee da da dum. Nobis Pacem. So what I'm driving at here is that if you I don't want to take the whole time, but if you look at the Dona Nobis Pacem, not from what it just is as a piece itself, but the multiple implications of it, and you have a chorus, and you treat a chorus to maybe having them study some of these other pieces that I've mentioned, it opens up the whole universe of the domain of beauty of the well-tempered system and of beauty itself. And I just want to end with another quote from that same little speech that LaRouche gave to sort of put a point on it. He says, "We can state the general principle most simply. To qualify as a beautiful work of art, an artistic production must be in agreement with the formal principles of beauty, in the sense that we might explain this and demonstrate it to critical minds among the classic. Might explain this and demonstrate it to critical minds among the classical Greek writers. To be true art, an artistic composition must have an additional quality. Its composition must be centered upon a valid scientific discovery, akin in nature to Mozart's K475 fantasy, which I just mentioned. It is this creative element of the composition which evokes in us that sense of joy, of surprise, akin to the tears of joy we might experience in observing a child's discovery of some valid principle, watching the child's personality illuminated by delight in that act of discovery. It is an emotion not that we might associate with eros, but with agape. It is the highest quality of emotion within which we are capable. And it's precisely that emotion, but informed emotion, that what we're driving at in terms of encouraging everyone. And I'm not just talking about trained choruses. I think families ought to get together and sing this Dona Nobis Pacem as the beginning of learning about what real classical music is all about. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And actually, what we're going to do before we bring up the panel is play another version of the performances that are coming in. And so everybody who is listening knows this. The concept here is to have this performed by church groups or educational groups, but as John said, also by families. We actually will have example of that as well. But if we could just have, I believe this is the Mexico Schiller chorus that did it in the next example we have. But go ahead and play. Next performance we have is actually from a family, which is a family of Butch Valdez from the Philippine LaRouche Society. And I want us to hear that performance, and I'm going to read a note that he wrote that accompanied this. This was done for the conference of November 22nd.
Dona Nobis Pacem, Pacem. Dona Nobis 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 Pacem. Dona
sorry, now the note that Butch sent with that performance, which was done for our conference of November 22nd, was, we of the Philippine LaRouche Society join the call of patriots of all nations to demand that our political leaders desist from their unproductive, destructive, and evil intentions of fomenting wars which ultimately lead to one which annihilates all of mankind. In the spirit of solidarity and love, allow us to share our humble contribution, which has been a battle cry of the Filipino LaRouche youth, which was then headed by my son, Anton. We lost Anton a year ago now from the dreaded COVID disease. We dedicate these songs to him and what he sincerely fought for, world peace and love. And then special thanks to our dear friend Mike Billington for his patience and unrelenting effort to share with us and teach us what LaRouche always said: classical ideas are not a period in time, but a way of life. So let's now bring up our panel to have a discussion about this. And these are all people in the trenches working with Dona Nobis Pacem. And I think we've got with us Farida Gillisberg from Denmark and Carolina Dominguez from Mexico, and Milena Robinson, who is, where are you, Milena? I don't know where you are. and I don't, do we have Karen Knopfsinger yet? Okay. So anyway, we'll bring you guys up and let's have people. So let's just open up their mics there, Jose. And also Kynan. Kynan's up there, Kynan Thistlewaite, who put together a montage, which actually people haven't seen yet. We'll see that at the end of the program. And let me just, okay, good, great. So we've got people. So let me just ask Farida, who I think we saw initially when it opened up, to say something and let us know what's going on in Denmark and in Europe and how you respond to anything that you've heard so far. You're muted. I think you're still muted. Is that right, Jose? I think we're still muted.
There we go.
Now we have it.
Now, okay, very good. Very shortly, I would like to maybe elaborate the first, from the beginning, the singing in Copenhagen, because, we concluded the election campaign here in Denmark, which was around this poster. Yeah, I don't know if you can see it. Can you see it? Stop NATO's wars, cooperation, peace through development. Here in Denmark, we are, the election is, has passed, and the government is not assembled yet. But what we did is actually we put up 500 posters of this all around Copenhagen, and especially at the parliament and at the media, to create a discussion about why we should stop the war. Because there was a consensus not to cover the war at all. After we put up the posters, which was a very big work, and we got help from many to put them up. And but so after we got them up, we found out very quickly that actually, many of them were just teared down. So nobody, who knew who did it. Even the police could not figure out what really happened here. So they don't want the discussion about the war, and so we got the discussion in anyway. And when I heard about the campaign about the Dona Nobis Pacem, this was very appropriate, because it's a good flank. Singing is always a good flank, and especially when you are very few people, like we had in a situation where we were only 2 people at an event which was taking place at the university. Around 350 students came to a big debate. but two people, we had to decide quickly what are we going to do. One went in and one stayed out and distributed leaflets. So what should we do here? Can we create attention? So then, yes, sure, Dona Nobis Pacem. I began singing just out very loud, the song, and I got a lot of attention, which was really good because everybody was looking. More people was taking the leaflets than before. So there was created an atmosphere where people, I got people's attention. So even the politicians, which were going into these meetings, but it was one person could create attention with the song, and the message is so beautiful. I mean, this is what we want. We don't want nuclear war. We want peace because if we don't get peace for everybody, this is going to end in a nuclear war. So we're going to lose. Everybody's going to lose. So when I was listening to this discussion, I just would like to say that at the end, after the election, we got everybody together who was helping in the campaign, and then we ad hoc decided, okay, we're going to record the Dona Nobis Pacem for our friends, and here you have it. So this was coming from the process of this campaign. I personally think this is a fantastic flank, and I would just like to also just say one thing about the question of singing. Friedrich Schiller, he has a poem called "The Power of Singing," or the power of the song, which is so beautiful because it is like he's describing what kind of universal, you can say, universality it creates, the singing, where does it come from? What is, it's, the vibration. But at the end, he, comes to the idea that, it warms your soul. And in times like this, we need to warm people's soul for mankind. And this is, I hope this is just the beginning of much more activities. But this is what I had in mind, like this word to tell about how it came about, and also the idea of using it as a flank and using it as a way to warm people's heart.
Milena, how about you?
We have had 2 of these vigils up here, and I'm in Boston, or in Quincy. So we've had a vigil that we did in Quincy, and then one in Boston with more people and already more of a sort of sense of unified purpose. We had somebody brought some friends who were able to sing the song, and as everybody has said, there's a universal message, but it's also simple enough that you can pick it up and learn it quickly, which people did. So we've had 2 of these vigils, and we're organizing one for tomorrow up here also in Boston, which is going to be in Brookline. And that's sort of an area with there's a lot of people that are of Jewish descent and of Russian descent also. And it's an area that we have organized in a lot over the last 15 years. So I came here in 2007. And as Bill went through, there had already been assembled a chorus, which was really the core of the youth movement, and very, very important both in organizing in the streets, but also in quickly getting across to these young people that were coming around what we're trying to do, how we're trying to recreate a commitment to this question of creativity and what it really means to be human. And which means if you can get someone to discover that question of creativity in themselves, they can quickly see it in others, even if those other people aren't, behaving the most human or creative at that moment. You can recognize a potential. And I think that's, really the question of why the music is so powerful, and specifically the polyphonic singing is so powerful, it addresses exactly that question of the mind of the other and allows you to transcend the conflicts that the oligarchy deliberately creates between people, that we are divided into, groups and played against each other through these narratives that are deployed. So as Bill was saying in the beginning, how do you transcend these kinds of discussions that go nowhere? And you do that exactly by outflanking and uplifting the discussion to a higher level. What is human in you and in me and in everybody in the whole world? So yeah, I think it's a simple canon, and it's easy to teach to a lot of people very quickly. So it's extremely efficient to get this across to a lot of people quickly. And if we can deploy social media and these other various ways of getting it to spread internationally, I think that's, I think it's a really effective flank that has been chosen at this moment.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I can see we're going to be able to discuss a lot of this. I know John's probably going to have a few things to say, and there's some other things to bring up. So let me just get everybody else in. Carolina. Hi. And don't worry about whether or not you're going to be completely understood. It's not a problem. Think about it musically.
Hola. I am nervous I don't speak in English, but I want to come to the deployment in the Mexico. We were singing and distributing 1,000 scores of the Dona Nobis Pacem. Thanks to LaRouche, different young people from different careers and economic levels, we are to learn to sing these works and turn them into something powerful in the streets. The music is powerful. It gives to power to the soul. It's my commentary.
All right, fine. That's it. That's all we need. Okay. I mean, and of course we have Mexico, Denmark, and well, you say Boston? Isn't that Sweden too? And that I just wanted
No, Denmark.
Oh my God! I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
One of my very good friends.
That's it. My life is over. Lizzie's gonna get me. So, right,
Dennis, I met Farida at a candlelight vigil in Denmark 15 years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's a story.
Yeah.
That's a story. Oh, and Carolina's being joined here by somebody else.
It's my doctor.
Yeah. Okay. So, Kynan, you've been composing these things, putting these videos together, and of course, it was just said by Milena that we might be able to do various things with social media. You have any ideas, either from what we've talked about today, or anything else you thought about this? And then we'll come back into kind of a general discussion among people.
Well, I think it's important that we just do as many of these as possible and just pump them out in just rapid fashion. I find it very efficient just to get as many of these out as possible, every day or so, every couple of days, just pump them up. And I think they will gain momentum. And, people will be impacted by the beauty of it because, as John was saying earlier, I mean, the words are simple in themselves. I think people can get an intuition of that. And it really does transcend the conversation to a much higher level. Because, I mean, because Bill was describing it, people just debating about the war and the causes of I'm sorry, my light just turned off. People debating about the causes of the war, blaming each other's sides. But we absolutely need to get to a higher level. And these 10 principles really frame it, I think. And the canon itself does that beautifully too. So, yeah, I mean, I was really happy to edit the montage together and to put that up because I think it is very powerful seeing all these people from all these different countries actually singing together, this call for peace. It's something that moves everyone, and I think we'll be really successful in putting it out. Just the more we do it, the more we organize, and the more videos we put together and put on social media, it'll definitely take momentum. So those are my thoughts. I'm sorry my light went off, by the way.
No promise. You got through it. It's good. Let me just check one thing before I ask a question of John and everybody else. Do we have anybody on from Washington, D.C.? I understand we had just done a Dona Nobis Pacem there, and I think they're just on by phone. So if we could just check that. We'll put them in now.
Dennis, can I be heard? This is Tim.
Yeah, we can hear you, Kim. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Karen from Baltimore may want to add something, but we just had a wonderful hour of singing next to the National Christmas Tree, which is on the ellipse in front of the White House. We were right center in the middle of the ellipse, so the backdrop was the White House. And just tremendous numbers of people were coming through. The morning had pouring rain, and there's in the forecast some showers later, but while we were there, the sun came out. So clearly there was some support for what we were doing from on high. And it was a very joyous sequence. We sang through probably 7-8 times the canon. What we made a point of, and other people may have already mentioned it, is that you can sing it through consecutively with all the voices singing the three parts of the canon, but end to end rather than on top of each other. So it sounds like just a single song. But then there's a sort of magical moment where you begin to have the voices come in on top of each other as it takes on the character of a canon, of a round. And you could see there's almost a jolt because the dimensions, it's one of these things that it's not a flat surface to start with, but suddenly the dimensions are sort of leap out at people, and people going by just stopped. They, some were walking and they would just stop and listen. At one point, we probably had 40 or 50 people listening, and many people were taking the leaflets as we were singing from the singers in a certain way. I mean, especially if people know Washington, D.C., it may be true in other places. There's a pretty hard-bitten kind of response when you're handing out leaflets. In this case, there was a certain sense of gratitude. People saying, look, you just brought something very beautiful. It's incumbent on me to find out why you're here, what you're handing me. We had many signs that hit at things. One of them was saying, bridges, not bombs, peace through development. We had a number of them that evoked John Kennedy, no nuclear war. If Karen can get on, she may be able to add a few more. But we filmed it, obviously. We had a few people, younger, sort of angry types before they came up who got angry seeing our signs or whatever, very few. We were struck by the number of visitors. Washington, D.C. obviously gets a tremendous flow of visitors, people from other countries. And it just transformed the entire space around the National Christmas Tree. At any one time, there might be 200, 300 people milling around in a fairly large area, a smaller number directly near us, but it just transformed the entire space. And I think it was a very good launch for what we hope to do in terms of continuing these things in D.C.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for that report. Just right hot off the street. All right, so let me just ask, John, you have any responses to what you just heard, first of all? I'll put it this way. We've been doing this for a long time, as you know, John, including various concerts over many decades in Washington in particular, or in other ways. And, you just heard several reports of people who are all involved in the process. This is a little bit different. It's not different than things we've done before in one sense, but it's a little different in that we actually are attempting to do something all over the world at the same time with this. Now, of course, we've heard a family do it. We've had our own choruses do it. We just heard about an intervention, and I think a few new people have been involved in that. So just wanted to get your sense of what you think about what has been said and how we might proceed.
Well, first of all, I mean, you have to make sure that the same. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to make sure that this remains fresh, and if you sing the same thing over and over and over again, you have to. The more frequently you do it, the more you have to work at it to make it beautiful, and to bring new aspects into it. But I also think that it should be done in conjunction with other pieces as well, like the Ave Verum Corpus, which can be done by a small group, a little bit better trained, but also some of the other wonderful pieces that can be just sung by a single individual. Like another one that's related to the same thing is this wonderful Schubert song, which is called An die Musik, Du holde Kunst. Right? You incredibly beautiful, magnificent music. Du holde Kunst. Again, it's the same. It's a rising fourth, falling sixth. It's exactly the same thing. It can be sung by a single individual, but there are other things that can be done. So it has to be done I think this should be the theme, the edge of it, but it has to be always kept fresh. And also that means that when you sing it, it has to be done with bel canto technique, as much as you can master that. It is a technique of what's called bel canto, means beautiful singing. And once, if you have the ability to work on it from the standpoint of your registers of your voice, that's very important. When you're moving up an interval, which is what I would call a wide interval of a sixth, almost inevitably, you are going to be crossing between one register and another register of your voice. To the extent to which you're aware of how that works, you can actually make this a lot better. I co-authored a book in the 1990s, which is a manual on tuning and registration, which specifically works through and gives multiple demonstrations from the classical composers of how they used registers of the human voice and of the various types of human voice, because there are 6 different types in general: the bass, baritone, tenor, alto, mezzo-soprano, and soprano. And each one of them has its own unique registers. And the beauty of polyphonic singing with multiple voices is the fact that the registers are changing at different places in the scale, and it increases the beauty if the people who are singing are aware of that, of what they're doing. There's also the question of beautiful phrasing, which you have to really work at. Like even something as simple as that second part, Nobis Pacem. It can be sung so many different ways. You can go, Nobis Pacem. Or you can actually think about it as a unit idea, right? Nobis Pacem. So that all those things have to be worked at. And the more you do it, if you want to make sure that you don't either bore yourself or bore your audience, is make it as absolutely beautiful as possible. I'll just say that for now.
We don't have a graphic of the Dona Nobis Pacem, but we do have one of the Ave Verum. Could you put that up, Jose? And just to show the interval that you keep talking about, which is an inversion in this case, but at least we can show it to people. And I think we also have a couple of graphics on the registers, just because you referenced it, but I don't know if people know what that is. So are those ready or not? Oh, that's the registers graphic. Well, we can start with that. John can tell people what that is. Okay.
Yeah, you can see that there. This is the registers of the child's soprano voice, and which is very similar to, really pretty much the same as the woman's soprano voice. And in the shaded area there is what's called the chest register. It's the first you might call that the first register. It's where you have the chest, because the resonance is more in. It's I mean, when you're singing well, there's resonance everywhere. There's resonance in the top, in your head, through the sinus cavities, in the throat, and in the chest. It's actually a fascinating scientific discovery in terms of investigation of how the resonances of the human voice work. So you have the chest register, and then you have this in the middle. You have number 2, what's called the central register, where there's a mixture of the chest resonances, a very specific mixture though of the chest resonances and the head resonances, and then you get to what's called third register over there on the right, and notice that it's divided by that F sharp there, with F with the number sign. That's the F sharp. And that's actually the boundary of the F sharp bounds these register shifts in the way that I was just talking about, a principle being bounded. And you see that then the third register, which is the highest notes there of the soprano voice, starting at the G, and then going all the way up to there's a very high register, these very high notes, the super high notes, which is the fourth register, which goes way up even above that, depending on how good the soprano is. So those are the registers of that voice, but the other ones are shifted for the other voices. And if you have one work, in other words, you have it when you have an alto and a soprano singing the same line. Something like the Dona Nobis Pacem and so forth. They're singing the same notes, but it's different because the alto is singing with different registers than the soprano. So you get all sorts of kinds of cross implications that then the composer can use to create new ironies, new ambiguities.
Have the graphic of the multiple registers of the 6 species of voice. If you see it there down, John.
Yep, there it is.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Very good. Bill, you have anything to add at this point?
Well, this reminds me of a story. In 1985, Schiller Institute had a conference in Rome in honor of the 1600th anniversary of St. Augustine. And my wife, she wasn't my wife then, but she went to this conference. She's an American. And I think after the conference, there was an initiative to organize in Rome. So there was a book table set up, and Claret was there to organize with the books and magazines and leaflets. They had big signs about the Strategic Defense Initiative and economic development for the whole world. She was accompanied by Isabel, organizer from Venezuela. So they had everything they needed to have a successful fundraising, organizing, deployment, except no Italians. Somehow, maybe there was an emergency or something, but you had Claret, an American, and Isabel, a Venezuelan. Neither one of them speak any Italian, and they're all set up to organize, except they can't really talk to people. So after a few minutes or hours of frustration, they decided that they would just start singing. So they sang to people and got them over from the singing. And then they point to the signs and the literature, and they were very successful in communicating what they were trying to accomplish, even though people they couldn't converse in Italian. I don't know. I was reminded of that through this discussion, and I also want to say very happy to see Denmark very richly represented in our panel.
Yeah, I want to just throw out the following as a comment and see if people have any response to it. See that one of the elements of what's happening with this, of course, is that music is a language. That's what you just pointed out. And the problem that you're having with a lot of the discussion on many of the questions that all of us are confronted with is that we are finding people to be in different ways illiterate. And that doesn't just mean they can't read or write. That's not really what I mean. It's more that, for example, you bring up something like the Advent season, but people don't really know any longer what that is. They don't know that that's associated with 4 cardinal virtues. They don't know what those are, or and the idea of hope, of peace, of love, and of faith. They don't know that Christmas is intended as a kind of a longer season of 12 days, which ends in Epiphany. And what they know what the word Epiphany is, or who was involved in that, or why that was important. This isn't a matter of religion. This is a matter of simple literacy. And why that becomes important is that when you've confused people on so many different levels on things that we're not even going to bring up here because they become sort of absurd to talk about as far as I'm concerned. I realize that they are spoken about as though they're normal, like multiple genders, right? That's like a thing that's spoken about like it's normal. But if you begin to talk about it as though it's normal, the whole character of your thinking devolves as soon as you accept it as a premise. And so one of the problems that has come up, and it's all over the transatlantic world, is speaking to people in a human way that allows them to respond to you in a human way. And I think that what you're reminded of in one sense is there's nothing different really in the principle being used here than is often talked about with respect to the spiritual. I'm thinking here about the African American spiritual, the Negro spiritual, as it's also called, where often the text is very simple, but there's something else being conveyed. And that's exactly why that music is often identified with the holidays, as is classical music. Everybody knows that as soon as you hear certain things from Bach or Handel, you sort of think about either Christmas or you think about the idea of a sacred occasion. So that's also part of, I think, what's happening. At the 10th point, that 10th principle that Helga brings up, I don't have it right in front of me, but it discusses this question of the image of man. And
I have it if you want me to read it.
Why don't you read it? Why don't you read it?
Yeah. The basic assumption for the new paradigm is that man is fundamentally good and capable to infinitely perfect the creativity of his mind and the beauty of his soul, and being the most advanced geological force in the universe, which proves that the lawfulness of the mind and that of the physical universe are in correspondence and cohesion, and that all evil is the result of a lack of development and therefore can be overcome.
Yeah. So just the final thing I think I'd like to bring up, and John, you may have something to say also, you, Bill, especially given what was just said about this man as a geological force, that I'd like you to make some comment about, Bill, as to why that's being referred to, what that even means. And anyone else also on this that would have to speak about this. But, we've been talking continually, and this is in principle number 8, that she says a solution to the existential threat to humanity cannot be found with the help of secondary or partial arrangements, but the solution must be found on the level of that higher one, which is more powerful than the many. It requires the thinking on the level of coincidentia oppositorum, the coincidence of opposites, of Nicholas of Cusa. And we've talked continually, John and others, about inversion in the Dona Nobis Pacem, and this notion of trying to get across what Helga's talking about here, about this idea of the coincidence of opposites. So I just want to throw this out to everybody kind of as and I guess the way to deal with it is this. Think about it as a question posed to everybody, and I'd like you all to respond in some way and also sort of give final thoughts, because we'll bring the show to a close at this point. So Bill, let me ask you first, because I think this idea of the geological force was said by John, but I don't know that people are going to understand what that means.
Yeah, this was the quote that I read before when I was giving the thought process, although this came afterwards. That's clearly a reference to Vladimir Vernadsky's principle of the noosphere. You know, the Earth and environs transformed by the process of the development and application of ideas by the human species. And it's also the principle in Genesis, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. This creativity of mankind, the ability to master new ideas and principles of the universe and apply them for the benefit of mankind, that has to be, as she says here, that has to be a fundamental principle in the universe, because human reason can transform nature. And we see that when it's applied. I think someone recently revived they published the speech of John Kennedy, where he talked about a joint U.S.-Soviet mission to the moon. I forget exactly where that was, but that's the kind of idea that has to be revived. That we're all going to work together. The nations are going to cooperate together to address what are the real enemies. Russia's not your enemy. China's not your enemy. Iran is not your enemy. Your enemy is disease. Your enemy is the rogue asteroid or comet that could wipe out humanity if you sit and act like a fool until it hits. And it is also, as she says, the evil is a result of the lack of development. The lack of development is your enemy. Although it's easy to combat, you just have to promote development. So I'll just leave it there.
Okay, thanks a lot. Milena, how about you? You had a lot to say actually about this in one sense in the remarks you already made, so.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess I'll just say what brings societies down, and we are, potentially looking at a complete tragedy, is that people want to hold on to bad ideas of the past that are not truthful. And, ushering in a new era of LaRouche's ideas and this idea of mankind in the image of the creator. We sing to do that, and we sing because we must to win, combined with the economic development. I'd see it as a weapon to win.
Okay. Very good. Farida? No, we can't hear you. Now we can.
Hello. Yes. I just would like to actually just revive this idea about the concerts we had, for example, around the musical dialogue of culture. We had 2 of them in Denmark. Actually, I'm sorry, 3 of them, and then came Corona, and there has been on pause. they were really powerful. And what made them very powerful was that you have Chinese, you have Russian, you have Italian, you have Swedish, you have Danish, this different new classical music from different nationalities, which we created something magic. People went out of this concert with this idea, wow, can Chinese music be so beautiful, or Russian music, or it created something which was so beautiful. And I'm mentioning it because people get bombarded day and night by propaganda, everywhere. And then they say, oh no, it's the bad Russians and the good Ukrainians. But that's the issue. The issue is, how can we get people to grow, to see the whole picture, which is especially with our organization. Lift yourself up, our sense perception, or what you are hearing, what you're seeing on TV, and ask yourself who is benefiting. This has always been our method. Get people to think. Lynn always said, you have to ask who is profiting. Of this situation. So the idea is we should maybe also get back to the idea of musical dialogue of cultures, and use the Dona Nobis Pacem maybe to get different nationalities. In Denmark and in the US, you have a lot of nationalities, but somehow make it more universal from the standpoint of getting really the Ukrainians and Russians, Chinese and Danes and Russian, getting on different nationalities together around concerts or around, candlelight vigils you have in the US. But I'm totally hooked on the idea to do something like that here in Denmark.
Okay, very good. So, John, anything further from you? Yeah. Oh, we can't hear you yet. No. Okay.
Sorry, I lost my mouse here. Taking up what Farida said, I'm glad she brought that up. Something that in just a recent news report that really upset me was a statement by the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, one Oleksiy Danilov, who said, the Russian Federation, quote, simply must be destroyed so that they cease to exist as a country within the limits in which they exist. They are just barbarians. And when you say that we should sit down at the table with these barbarians and talk about something, I generally think that would be inappropriate. And then he goes on and, he compares Hitler and Putin, and so he says Putin is like Hitler and so forth. But then he says something which is really bothersome. He says, you, i.e. the Russians, you are Muscovy, which was only on its territory. And I'll explain what he means by that. You are thieves who constantly stole someone's history. You constantly demand something, but you are not at all worthy of anyone in the world communicating with you. Now, this brings back, this is oligarchical in the deepest and most reactionary sense, because what he's actually referring to is he's saying that really what Ukraine should do is go back to the days of the Middle Ages, really almost of the Dark Ages, during the days of the Kievan Rus, which was based in Kiev and also in Novgorod in the north, right? Which was an empire which got destroyed by the Mongols in the 13th century, the beginning of the 13th century, and it was only later, after the defeat of the Mongols, about a century later, that Moscow, then the Moscow kingdom actually then began to expand and incorporate all of the Kievan Rus, right? And in terms of the language and everything else. And so what he's basically saying is that everything after that is that Moscow stole the Kievan Rus from us, and we need to go back to the Middle Ages, in the days there. And that's the way that they can explain that this ideology that Putin is like Hitler and so forth to them and so forth. This is it's very much like the old Nazi idea, but it's romantic. It takes you back to the day, go back to the days of the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages. And my thoughts about this is that, how when Russia announced its special military operation, keep in mind that one of its war aims is to denazify the country. And it's always bothered me, and I have no answer to this, but maybe music is the answer to it. Because, obviously this poor soul, Mr. Danilov, right, believes that other people are not people. He looks at people as animals. And so therefore I am an animal and he's another animal, and we're going to tear each other apart. And if maybe music will be the only thing that will truly denazify Ukraine. In terms of, not all Ukrainians are obviously this demented, but there are enough of them that something has to change. And I hope it's not just going to be that Russia comes in and has to kill them all, because I don't think that would be a solution either. So I don't have a solution. I don't know what's going to happen, but I think that certainly working with music and increasing the amount of beauty in the world is certainly something which is well worth trying in order to, amongst everything else that we're doing, in order to stop this and stop the West from committing collective suicide, and hopefully get the West to join up with Russia and with China to create a better world, a real human world.
Well, what I think we'll do is I'll say something now in response to what you just said, John. Normally I would do like a summary, and I'll do it here, and then just thank everybody for being with us. I think the relevance here is to understand that there is a fundamental misunderstanding that people have of the matters before us. Vladimir Vernadsky, who was of Ukrainian descent, and is one of the great patriotic figures in Soviet history. He died in 1945. Was also the founder of the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, but never thought of himself as other than a universal figure. And his idea of the noosphere, he was the person that recognized that the greatest transformation in the evolutionary history of the planet was a product of mankind, that you cannot separate or alienate the human race from nature, but you also must understand that the human race represents something unique, and a form of action in the universe that, to the best of our knowledge, is unique, and to the best of the knowledge of all species that we know of. That is to say, they don't really have that knowledge. Other species don't think of themselves as species. They may think of themselves in certain ways, or may act in certain ways as groups. But the ability to see and to distinguish one species from another, be that animal or be that, in fact, in the form of inanimate, or should be the classification of what's called inanimate nature. This is something that the human race does uniquely. And Vladimir Vernadsky is the most advanced statement of a kind of tradition that harkens back to Leibniz, to Pasteur, Curie, the two Curies who were friends of his, particularly Marie Curie, with whom he had extensive discussions about some of Pierre's work, and Pierre's work as a student of sort of a follower of Pasteur. So that France, Poland, Ukraine, Russia, Germany. These were names and locations of individual minds with whom Vernadsky was involved in this universal dialogue. When President John F. Kennedy at American University made that proposal, well, actually, he made the proposal at the United Nations, but he also talked about the proposal at American University in 1963, made that proposal. That was precisely because only months earlier, he had found himself in a position of threatening to annihilate the planet in the name of defending the United States against the Soviet Union. And that seemed to him, certainly in the course of the 54 days in total and 13 days in particular that he underwent that, to be the height of absurdity that anyone, any individual human being would ever be placed in the position of being able to make a decision that would literally eliminate not merely his or her nation, not merely most of the human race, but perhaps all life on the planet for some period of time to come. And faced with that absurdity of that kind of violence and power being in that way concentrated in an individual, decided that he would offer the great adversary of the moment, not just an olive branch, but a way ahead jointly into a realm that neither understood, that is space and the space exploration. That is the meaning behind particularly the 10th principle that Helga Zepp-LaRouche talks about, that mankind is inherently good, which is the kind of thing that, by the way, I think you'll find many people will dispute. They may not realize that as soon as you dispute that, you have belittled yourself. You know, one of the elements concerning the issue of slavery, which not just in terms of American chattel slavery, but slavery as a whole, is that at some point, the slave decides to remain a slave. Now, there's a great controversy about that a lot of people like to bring up. But there is a reason that Harriet Tubman was Harriet Tubman, or Sojourner Truth or others were who they were. There was a reason that Frederick Douglass was who he was. That there is a decision that's made to be free or to die, because freedom is a greater good, and that's a greater identity, even if it's only for a moment, even if it's only in the intent to be free. Now, this idea in African American experience in particular is expressed in one song that was written, sometimes referred to as the Negro National Anthem or the African American National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, written by James Weldon Johnson and his brother, Rosamond Johnson. Both were very active in areas of civil rights and so forth, but the reason for writing this song was that there was this sense of exclusion when it came to the United States, despite the fact of how many years had gone by, decades, centuries even, of involvement of African Americans in the struggle for the nation. But at the same time, there was no doubt that, as is seen in the case of the first Rhode Island Regiment in the American Revolution, or the 54th Massachusetts in the case of the Civil War, or the 741st Tank Artillery Division in the Second World War, or the 369th Division in the First World War, etc., that African Americans had not only fought and died for the country, that they had been there from its inception and had been involved in every one of the conflicts. So the contradiction that was felt by the continuation of the legacy coming off slavery, including the racism that was characteristic of the United States, and it was characteristic of the United States, could only be perpetuated if those who had been enslaved in some fashion refused to assert their freedom from not that slavery, but also from the definition of inferiority, of inhumanity that had been foisted and thrust upon them, that you had to reject this in order for freedom to come. And if you look at the situation in the world today, where we all feel hostage to the idea of the trigger of a thermonuclear war by some fool of whatever persuasion, the only way that we will ever be free of that really is if each of us makes a decision that we must become the masters of that situation. I mean, that's what Lyndon LaRouche actually did during the years of 1982 and 83, when he decided to formulate a policy to get rid of all of this. It was called the Strategic Defense Initiative, and he proposed it to many people, actually, and they doubted that the policy would ever be implemented. In fact, they were in a position to help and refused to do that. And as he said to those that said that there was no possible way that he could get it done, he said, I only have to convince one guy, the President of the United States. And in fact, that occurred. And the world we're in now, in which we're talking about something that was actually solved 40 years ago, is only there because of the arrogant lack of acknowledgement of the fact that he did that. This was done in the United States. It's the case that in the United States, least of any nation in the world, is there any excuse for anybody to think that they can't play a role in changing the immediate circumstance in front of us, not by necessarily talking to a congressman who may be corrupt, not by necessarily talking to the president who may be senile or incapable or incompetent, not by complaining to somebody on internet, but by what you individually lift your voice to do. So the concept, and we got an email actually came in during the program from somebody in Marietta, Georgia, who said, hey, I sing this piece all the time, but I don't have anybody to sing it with me. I can't do this by myself. He's looking for people to join him. So must it be, I think, that we decide that this season, instead of skipping Christmas, which most people do and have done for most of their lives in terms of what it's really about, I think we should show up. I think that we should show up morally, and I think we should show up by deciding, okay, I get the story. I understand. The idea was to come to earth for the purpose of liberating mankind. Lyndon LaRouche used to talk about people as angels, or thinking about your life as though you are an angel, that you have been brought to the planet for a very short period of time to make a difference in that planet, and you wouldn't be here unless you could make a substantial or unique and important difference. So that the concept of what we're proposing around this Dona Nobis Pacem, to grant us peace, can be thought about in another way. That the turmoil inside of people about their sense of worthlessness, their rage about other people and their so-called savagery, this shows that there's a lack of something inside. And it might be the case that, as John said a moment ago, maybe music is the way to bring that peace about inside of each one of us, so that this concept of taking this time to stop a war, not which is external, but which is also internal, that is not made up of flesh and blood, but is made up of principalities and powers and forces of darkness and wickedness in high places, yes, but is also the case that there's wickedness in low places. It's not just Big Brother who's the problem, maybe Little Brother's the problem. And so our ability to look inside ourselves and take this moment to join together and say, hey, let's do something beautiful. Let's just do something that says what we all actually want and what we all desire and what we all, in that sense, deserve. And so we are initiating this. We want everybody involved that wants to be involved to get in touch with us if you have ideas for what can be done, or you have, and of course for the circulation of the 10 principles that Helga Zepp-LaRouche put forward. So I want to just now thank Milena Robinson, Farida Gillisberg, Carolina Dominguez, Tim Rush, and of course John Segerson and Bill Ferguson, and then Kynan Thistlethwaite, who I think has composed the montage that we're going to see, which will conclude our show for today.
Dona Nobis Pacem, Pacem. Dona Nobis Pacem.
Dona Nobis Pacem, Pacem. Dona Nobis Pacem. Dona Nobis Pacem. Dona Nobis Pacem. Pacem.